Hi everyone, today we're going to discuss pattern cards. For those of you who don't know what pattern cards are documents that detail the separate pieces that go into a garment. This is different from your bill of materials, which lists, your fabric's going to be this and your buttons are going to be this. Your pattern card details the separate sections like the front top, the front skirt, the waistband, like the actual separate pieces of the garment. So if you are one of my viewers who is interested in being a designer or learning more about being a designer, grab a pen, take some notes. If you're one of my viewers who is more interested in the illustration side of things, you could probably skip this one. It'll probably bore you. And if you're one of my viewers who watches just for shits and giggles, grab a snack, have a seat, join us. So basically, the design team, whatever, creates the design and they make a flat. The pattern maker will then take the flat sketch and start drafting the initial pattern, whether it is from a block or simply making some small changes from an existing pattern, or starting from scratch, which is pretty rare, but it does happen if a style is very different from anything the company has run before. So the pattern card is made by the pattern maker. Okay, here's a filled out pattern card for this dress style. This is a first sample from one of my collections ages ago. And I know there are some weird fitting issues that we fixed moving forward, but this is the only version I could find of this one. I probably sold the better ones. Here is the filled out pattern card for this style. Number one, you need the flat sketch. The first thing they do is they take the flat sketch that you give them and they cut it out and they tape it to the pattern card. Okay. I was the designer and the pattern maker at the time for this style. So all I did was I copied and pasted it in Excel before I printed my pattern card. That's why you don't see any tape. You need to, on the top of your pattern card, it should have your company name and the address, phone number, website. I whited all my information out, obviously. Okay. It should have your style number. And a style number is not just some willy-nilly number you pull out of the air. There needs to be some kind of organization to your system of style numbers. I have a whole video on that. Go watch it. I'll drop the link somewhere. The style name, a lot of people remember names better than numbers. Okay, so have a style name, a brief description. This is a sleeveless shift that is a zip front. And the size ranges can be number sizes, 0 to 14. It can be letter sizes, small, medium, large. It can be, like if you're doing pants, you could be doing a waist inseam. Okay, so put in the size range, the season you're running it, and the initial pattern maker so that when you go and make changes, you can hunt down the pattern maker and be like, okay, we need to fix this. We have this information. We have the dress design. Then the pattern maker will start making the pattern for the dress. Now, when the pattern maker makes the pattern, okay, there is an industry standard to how all pattern pieces are labeled. You need the following information. Number one, the line name or the company name. Like if the company has several lines within it, then it should have the line name. After that, it should have the style number. This pattern piece is the same for two different versions of the same dress. So it has both style numbers here. And then after that, it will have the size. So whatever your sample size is what you cut the pattern for, right? So this one is a size 4. And you need that so later on when you're grading your pattern, making the bigger sizes and the smaller sizes, you know what your starting point is. Cut to self. What does that mean? Okay, what that means is cut 2 means you're going to take this pattern and you're going to cut it twice. Once this way and once this way. Okay, so that you get a left and a front of the front top. Self means the fabric you're going to cut it out of. Self or shell fabric is your main outside fabric. So in this dress, there's 2 outside fabrics, this black linen, which is the majority of the dress, and this black leather, which is only just a little bit of the trim. Right? So the main fabric is the linen, and that is your self fabric. This pattern piece is this little skirt hip here because I have pockets, because I am a huge fan of pockets in women's wear, as you know. And look, these pockets, you can stick your whole hand in them. I'm all into that stuff, right? So this pattern piece, it has, again, the company name, the stand number, the size that it's for, cut to self, okay, 1 for each side in the self fabric. And the last part is going to be your pattern piece name. Keep it really straightforward and simple as possible. This is your front top because it is in the front and on the top. This is the skirt hip. This is like the extra piece at the hip of the skirt. And then of course, your grain lines are on your pattern pieces. These pattern pieces are cut from the self. And so they're all labeled in either graphite pencil or black. All pattern pieces are labeled according to an industry standard color code and are listed on your pattern card following the same color code. So self pieces are always labeled on the pattern and on the pattern card, black or in pencil. Contrast, okay? In this case, my leather is my contrast fabric. So it's on the outside, but different from the self. And those are labeled blue, both on the pattern and on my pattern card. And then lining, this dress is lined, okay? And it's got a rayon Bemberg lining. And I have my lining pattern pieces here. And everything on the lining pattern pieces are labeled in green, both on the pattern and on the pattern card. The way it's labeled, name, style, number, size, cut however many, and the name, they're the same, and in this order, it's just labeled all in green, all in blue, etc. And then interfacing, like fusibles and whatnot, horsehair, blah, 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 are labeled in red, okay? That's why I always have a million of these little skinny Sharpies or these roller pens in my sewing and pattern making toolkit so that I can label my patterns and my pattern cards correctly. What happens if you have more than one contrast, more than one lining, more than one interfacing? You can definitely use other colors, but you need to reserve the blue for the first contrast, the green for the first lining, and the red for the first interfacing. So you've drafted typically they'll draft the shell, they'll do a muslin of the shell, fit it briefly, make corrections, and then do the lining and interfacing to fit the shell, because linings and interfacing patterns are made off of the outer shell pattern pieces, right? Because they have to fit the outer shell, right? So they'll make that. And so they have all the pattern pieces, and then you'll start filling out your pattern cards. The first thing is the self, okay? You're going to put down what the self fabric is. In this case, it's linen. There's no need to put down colors. So remember how I said I'm gonna cut 2 of these, 1 for each hip. So see here, it says skirt hip, cut 2. Okay. Front top, cut 2. Let's pretend that you are doing a bodice that is asymmetrical. Okay, let's say the design, you have a jewel neck and it's a little boxy top, but you have a seam here, and this is a self fabric, and this is your contrast 1, okay? This is obviously an asymmetrical one, and it is cut 1. You're only going to need one of those for the front, right? And so you would write front, top, and you're going to need 1, and so you would write 1. And because it's asymmetrical, you need to make sure that it's being cut in the correct face up, because 99.9% of fabrics out there have a right side and a wrong side. And you want to make sure that everyone is cutting your fabric the right side up, right? And so you would take a red pen and mark RSU, right side up. So this front top piece, you're going to cut it once, and you're going to cut it right side up. And this is also how you're going to label the actual pattern. When it says cut 1 lining, you know, for this piece, it will say cut 1 self, and then in red, RSU, right side up. And then the yield, okay? The pattern maker needs to take the pattern pieces, lay them out on the cutting table, following the grain line, and they need to get an estimate on the yield. They will need to get the fabric, you know, the initial fabric from the designer, so that they could figure out how wide it is, so that they could figure out the yield. You can't figure out the yield without knowing how wide the fabric is. You know, a lot of linens and denims, cotton ducks and things, they're like anywhere from 56 to 60 inches wide. Silks like chiffons and charmeuses, they typically are like, oh, they're pretty narrow. They're like 38, 40 inches wide. You know, of course there are exceptions to the rule, but yeah, silks are fairly narrow. Cotton and linens are fairly wide. You know, linings like this rayon, they run fairly wide, but you need to get the width so that you can lay out your pattern pieces and figure out how many yards you need for one of these, so that your purchasing department can order the correct amount for sampling and for production. Okay. And also your production team needs to know how much yardage you need so they can cost out the garment. Okay. You can't cost it out without knowing how much material you're going to use. So you need the yield. A lot of the time, like, I mean, I've never worked for a giant corporation, and so maybe they fill out each individual pattern piece yield in those giant corporations. But most of the places I've worked, they only do the yield for the overall self. So they'll lay out all the self pieces and get the yield for that. They'll lay out all the contrast pieces and get the yield for that. Okay? But the yield needs to be listed by the pattern maker. I have all my pieces listed, the cuts, the yield, and then contrast. My contrast here is leather, and then I'm gonna have my cuts here, the waistband and the back neck facing, which you can't see right now, and then the yield, my lining pieces, has all the pieces, and then the first interfacing, which is a fusible. I'm gonna fuse this leather so that it kind of keeps its shape nice, because waists, especially fitted waists, tend to be a high abrasion area. And then interfacing 2 is organza, and I have them at the neckline, around the armhole, and at the hem. They need to be in these colors, and they need to be in this order. So it needs to be self, and then all your contrasts separated, of course, and then all your linings, and then all your interfacings. Okay, people in the industry, this is a standardized thing, and they expect a pattern card to be in a particular order, in a particular color system. And when you don't follow that, and you make it more difficult for people making your garments to make your garments, they're not gonna like you. You want the people making your stuff to like you. All right? Make everyone's life simpler and follow the industry standard. Other notes on the bottom here are different by company. You know, some companies are like, you must include this information at the bottom of every pattern card. Some people are more loosey-goosey. I like pattern makers to jot notes on two things: trims and seam allowance. Okay? Seam allowance so that I can read the patterns in case there is some tricky kind of seaming that they're doing, even if they're not. Just like, oh, it's just a standard 3/8, whatever. Oh, okay, it's fine. But I know that, so I like seam allowance notes. I like it when pattern makers label the trim, especially when the measurement of the trim is related to the pattern. I, as the pattern maker, have marked a number 5 metal 2-way zipper. One of those, 30 inches is the max. Okay, so that's a measurement that is coming from the dress. Like, I can draw the dress and be like, I want it to start at the very top, and then I want it, a little bit of ways from the bottom. I don't want it to go all the way down. And I could put that, but the actual measurement is going to come from the pattern. The pattern maker will have the information of, how long this is going to be. So 2-way zipper, and this is 30 inches, marked on the pattern card so that we know which zippers to order. Some companies like it when it has like a note on where the labels are going to be. The main label is going to be on the back. Some people get even more specific and they'll do like a blow up. Some people leave that for the rest of the spec pack, like special pages in the spec pack for all the labels and the hang tags and things. Okay, so it's really different on the company. Just make sure that it's organized, that everyone within your organization can find it. It's like, oh, at our company, we have one separate page in the spec pack for all the labels and where they need to go. And that's where that is, and not on the pattern card. Just make sure that it's set for everybody to understand easily. And that is it, okay? And then you're going to punch a hole through the top. You're going to punch holes with your rabbit punch in all your pattern pieces, and you're going to gather up all your pattern pieces, and you're going to put, this is a pattern hook, and there you go. And anytime you have your pattern, the design is right there, so you know what that pattern is for. Super easy to find. You have all your cuts and your yields and what fabrics you need and everything you need to pull to create one of these samples. Okay, super straightforward, easy to read, beautiful. I know this kind of information is a little bit on the boring side, but it is definitely on the completely necessary side for you to know so that you can get your garments made, both in product development and in production. Okay, so that's how you fill out a pattern card. As usual, I'll check the info box if you have a question. Leave me comments, like, share, subscribe. All those beautiful ways that you show me love. And if I forgot something, let me know. All right. And I will see you in the next video.